If you are in debt, like significant amounts of debt, it could have an impact on your job. And if you're someone who needs to file for a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, it can be tough to navigate that conversation with your employer. We're going to talk about what all this means with a licensed insolvency trustee. His name's Rob Kilner. He's with Spurgill, and he's in Barrie, Ontario today. Hello there.
Hey Bruce, how you doing?
I'm sure a lot of people that call you have a big question in the back of their minds, and that may
Yeah.
be, what does this mean for my job if I have to take the step to file a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy? What are some of the things that they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, 99 times out of 100, nothing. Like it's just not going to impact you whatsoever. From a job or career perspective, where it might impact you, do you deal with money? Like that's the basic question. Do I deal with money? Am I trusted with money? That's where an impact may happen. But I mean, if you're a framer just framing buildings, like no, there's going to be zero impact. Like that's just you don't deal with money on a day-to-day basis. It's really when you're entrusted with money for your firm. That's when the questions start.
And if you were in a job like that, say you're a bank teller,
Yes.
probably a part of your hiring process would have been a credit score. Are you
Yeah.
obligated to loop back to your employer and say, listen, my situation has changed?
Oh, no, not once you're hired, right? Like unless it has an impact on your job or it's a requirement of your job to report so, right? So it depends if you're looking for a job or actually there, right? If it has zero impact and your governing body doesn't require you to report those things, then no, it's really none of their business. Nor can you get fired for it. Like a lot of people, oh, will I be fired? No, it's very illegal to do so in Canada simply for the fact that you filed for bankruptcy, unless it's the requirements of your job. Otherwise, I mean, your employer will be dragged to the landlord, not the landlord, but the Human Rights Tribunal, Ministry of
Right.
Labor pretty
For
quick, right? So
discrimination, probably, right?
you got it.
This is a critical life event for people, and it may
Yes.
be, a huge relief for them to have this kind of filing in place because they can,
Mhm.
start to get back on track. But like any life event, that stress can seep into the workplace. Is
Right.
there any advantage to proactively having a conversation with a trusted HR resource or manager to say, "Hey, listen, like this is what I'm going through. I just wanted you to know."
Yes, proactive is always better. Just because you might not know if it impacts your work or not. Like, so sometimes people don't realize they may be bonded in a situation or something like that, where your credit actually has an impact. So to get bonded, so like under a bankruptcy, getting bonded is very tough because for the listeners, like what's bonded? It's like an insurance on you in case like in our capacity be like theft or money, right? You're dealing with money on that daily basis. Taking it back to what I said is important. Yeah, talking about your HR saying, look, this is what I'm looking to do. Will it have an impact? And they'll be able to advise really well on that. So something like a bankruptcy, you likely will be impacted with being able to be bonded. Now that affects your job. Now that affects your employment. Where something like a consumer proposal, which is the other legal insolvency, doesn't have as much, and they can advise you on that. So you do see a lot of professionals who actually have to report these things to their bodies, be it lawyers, accountants, brokers, that type of stuff, going to the proposal because it doesn't have that effect on their ability to actually do their job from a day-to-day basis that a bankruptcy would.
I didn't actually think about the bonded part because when I
Yes.
think of that word, I think of a lot of trades. Like a lot,
Yeah.
you look at a plumber and it says all of our tradespeople are bonded. So
Mhm.
if I've been employed by a plumbing firm, I've been there for a decade, all's good, then I file for a bankruptcy. Does that put my bond at risk? Would my employer need to call the insurance company and say, this person's no longer in compliance?
Yes and no. So, like you're talking about a plumber, like right. So the bonded probably is not financial there. More it has to be like destroying somebody's house with doing the job incorrectly. Like
Right.
nothing, right? Because you're not doing money. From a money aspect, a theft aspect, yes, like that's where it becomes important. Another one could be like from a government worker. So people don't always think of this. Like their risk is different. So their risk is now more almost like to go really high level, like espionage, like blackmailing, right? Where now you're going in a little bit more deeper of like where risk averse when it comes to these things. So sometimes people think the credit score is the end all be all of a decision. Where I'll give you an example, like somebody has a credit score of 800 and has $100,000 worth of debt. Somebody went through a bankruptcy now, has $0 of debt, but a 550 credit score.
Mm,
At that government, who's the bigger risk? It's the
mm.
100,000 at the 800 because they're the ones who can be more easily manipulated or at risk of doing something because of that financial pressure. So it's actually not always even credit score in the end, depending on
Yeah.
what the job is.
So you've given us some really interesting insight for someone who is employed. For
Mhm.
someone who's in job search, what should
Yes.
they be thinking about if they've got a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy on their file?
Really, because there's probably two stages of your getting a job. There's one, there's the interview stage, and the laws are pretty strict. I'm not an HR professional. My sister is one actually, but so what they can ask in an interview is really restrictive, right? Because again, that discrimination. But it could be a requirement of the job where it comes in the application. Once you get into that application stage, where if they're talking about a credit score, now be proactive, now discuss because a lot matters why you did something, not always what you did, but why you did it, right? So if I filed a bankruptcy or a proposal or anything for that matter, and it was due to like a fraudulent nature, well, you're going to be in trouble. Best of luck, right?
Yeah.
But doing it from like a life event, which we see so often being like a divorce or something like that, that can be explained and it could also be put into a very positive light, saying, I had this problem, I took care of it. Right.
Yeah.
So now I am somebody who can be trusted instead of wouldn't it have been worse if I just let it all sit there and stew? Right. So they can
Yeah.
see it in a very positive light.
And I can see that, for someone who was a victim of intimate partner violence, for example, sometimes the way that gets part of the resolution is some sort of a filing, either a consumer proposal in bankruptcy or a debt
Correct.
consolidation program, something like that. And the context makes an enormous difference in terms of how that's interpreted by the employer. So on that one, you want to make sure you get ahead of it, right?
Exactly, because the person hiring you then is a human, right? So they can understand that. So if you let them just judge a piece of paper, they're going to see negative credit score. Oh, this person must be super irresponsible or something like that. We don't want Jane in charge of such and such. But once you put that context story, they go, oh, wow, okay, I can sympathize with that because who hasn't heard stories of like that, be it friends, family, unfortunately. You can understand that situation a lot easier.
As you work with the client to look at the option that's best for them with a consumer proposal in particular, one of the things you're looking at is their budget. So, like, what's coming in on the income front, what's going out on rent and car payment and whatever. You need to be able to put forward a proposal to creditors that says this makes sense. Over the course of 4 or 5 years, they're going to be able to pay the $500 a month or whatever that is. How do you factor in the stability of that employment income, or do you just ask them the question and they answer it? My concern is that some people might be in a precarious employment situation and then their consumer proposal fails because their income's not certain.
Right. So what we try to do is project, right? And who can really project the next 5 years? Very tough. But what we at least try to project is the next year or two, right? As you're going, what are you kind of looking at? And do you see any risk to your job, right? Like say like I'm on a temp position for 6 months, there's risk. And it's going, oh, okay, so do you want to lock yourself into this? But also within the act, there's actually a lot of leeway in the sense that you can always put an amendment well into a proposal saying, my life has changed, my situation has changed. Will you consider something lower to the creditors? And they're very understanding of those things. Is there a bottom barrier they'll accept? Absolutely, like anything. But there is actually provisions within the act to help that. So that you're not stuck for 5 years. If life changes,
Right.
it can change. Yeah.
What about for a temporary income interruption? So you've signed on the bottom line,
Mhm.
you've got this consumer proposal, you lose your job, and you have a hard time making that payment for a couple of months. Is there a mechanism in the act or even in practice that provides some wiggle room? Or is it really clear? This is what you got to do, and there is no wiggle room.
Sir, they actually, that's why they have, there's one major rule I always tell clients is like, you can't fall behind 3 months payments, right? So you can fall behind 2.9. So it's kind of just like your car. They
Right.
give you a little leeway. It's like, do you need to push off a payment or two? Once you got to push off three or more, now we're in a little bit of an issue. But they even have ability within the act to, if you do fall behind three, get back into the proposal. They call it a revival. So
Mm,
there are these abilities, and again, at those stages, what do the creditors do? They evaluate. They go, okay, did this person, is this honest, unfortunate, or is this person just going to Vegas and blowing their money and being irresponsible? Get out of here. We're not going to help them out, right? So they do take that into consideration of when they can help that person
mm.
get through to the end, because that's the goal. I mean, if you fail 2 years into it, only person that wins is the trustee, right? And
Yeah.
it's not the outcome we want to see. So
I want to come back to where we started because I think it's a
yeah,
point that bears repeating. When I asked you what the consequences were,
yeah.
I'm kind of surprised. They're not as grave as one might think.
People always overthink, right? Like they always think the worst because again, I heard my friend and he heard a friend who said this, and that friend probably left out the greatest detail of how they actually got there. No, so I mean, we filed lawyers, accountants, brokers, everything under the sun, and they're not out on the street having to relearn how to be a mechanic. Like they're still in their profession. It just becomes how do you have to during the time frame you're in the insolvency, how do I have to alter my job to make it work? Honestly, the proposal, there's very little because the big difference is in bankruptcy, you can't be a director. Being bonded, like I told you, is a lot more difficult. And a proposal is not so much.
Right.
So there's not much change to their job for the most part on those, as long as the reason they're doing it is for a very valid reason.
Right.
Again, if it's
Right.
fraud or business, you're in a
Different
little bit
thing,
more trouble. You
different
got it.
category of trouble.
You got it.
Rob, I really appreciate you joining us with your insight today. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Bruce. Take care.
Rob Kilner is a licensed insolvency trustee with Spurgill. He joined us from Barrie, Ontario today.